and welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. I am so grateful that you're here. My name is Kim Manager, and I'm a women's leadership coach. I started this podcast because as a lifelong sufferer of imposter syndrome and a coach who sees this in 98% of the women I meet, I wanted to take this conversation to a bigger stage, so to speak. Imposter syndrome is triggered by a lot of things, but two of the primary triggers are transitions and feeling different from those around us. Women in traditionally male-dominated environments experience these triggers on an almost daily basis, so it's only natural that we would feel this way. What compounds these feelings is the sense that we are alone. The belief that if we share our feelings, we'll expose our incompetence even further. So we carry it around like a deep, dark secret. I started this podcast because I want to put a stop to this nonsense and destigmatize imposter syndrome. Because we don't talk about it, we look around and assume that everyone around us has it all figured out, that we're somehow the exception to the rule, when in reality, we're all feeling this way. And when we can own that and say it out loud, we all benefit. Nobody more so than you. So thanks again for being here. If you enjoy it, please share it with others who might also benefit. Welcome, Leang. I'm so excited to be having this conversation with you today. And I would love to start by having you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here, Kim. It's an absolute pleasure. My name is Leang Chung, and I am the founder and CEO of a company that I launched this year called Pelora Stack. And the way that I describe Pelora Stack is that we partner with companies that are looking to up-level or upskill their HR organization. And what we do for them is customize learning content in the form of online courses, toolkits, and coaching in order to do just that and really transform that next generation of HR professionals.
Wonderful. And we're going to talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about how you got here. Congratulations on this exciting
Thank
change. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. So I'll ask you the questions I always ask everybody, which are, what does imposter syndrome mean to you? And how, if at all, has it shown up in your life?
For me, imposter syndrome is a limiting belief that you either are faking something or maybe you don't have it, whatever it happens to be in your profession or in your personal life, and it becomes a barrier in some ways. And again, it's a mindset that creates this real limiting belief for yourself. And that's the way that I see it. In terms of how it's impacted me or whether it's shown up in my life, I think it rears its ugly head throughout multiple stages in both my personal life and my professional life. I probably see it a lot more in my professional life. I can recall pretty early on in my early professional career where I was working in a corporate setting for the very first time. And I remember thinking, this is a whole new ball game. There are social norms here that I'm not familiar with. There is a, kind of like a rule book that I don't know of. And I, in some ways I felt like I didn't belong. And I had to I had to work hard to feel as though I fit in and had a place there. And so, I look back on that early experience and I look towards the current experience that I'm going through right now as a brand new entrepreneur. And I'm going through the same thing where I don't know everything that I need to do. I'm constantly learning, and that definitely puts me in a position of feeling very vulnerable and maybe feeling that sense of imposter syndrome during this particular experience.
Yeah, I think you hit on one of the key challenges or trigger points of imposter syndrome, which is when you're in that time of change and transition, right? And you don't feel like you have I love how you say the rule book, right? There, it's like oh no, it seems like everybody else understands how the game is played and I'm still trying to figure it out. So you kind of feel behind and a little bit like you don't fit in. If we go back to the corporate example for a moment, in hindsight, were there specific things that helped you get through that?
Yeah, the one thing that really sticks out for me is I had a lot of mentors along the way. Mentors that were either my direct managers or mentors in the form of senior leadership within a company. And they saw something in me during that point in my career and took an interest in getting to know me, took an interest in helping me advance in my career. In some ways, they took the time to give me advice and help to guide me, and that really helped to build up my confidence level. It helped me to understand and really connect with this feeling of, okay, so maybe I do know what I'm doing. Maybe I do understand the rules. Maybe I do have what it takes to be in the role that I have. And then not only that, I have what it takes to see something bigger for myself in the future.
I love that. And I'm curious, did you do anything that you're aware of, anything proactively or strategically to find those mentors? Because I can imagine that there are people listening who are thinking, oh, I would love to have a mentor. I would love to have that kind of support, but I don't even know how.
Yeah, so earlier on, I wasn't even familiar with the term mentoring in the workplace. So it was something that showed up in my life in a really pleasant way. And it started to become this reoccurring experience that happened throughout my career. I think it was very instrumental and very impactful, particularly in the first, I would say, 5 to 7 years of my career. And when I connected the dots between how that experience of being mentored and the confidence level that I was able to gain from that mentoring experience, once I was able to see that connection, I actually started to seek it out in the following experiences after that, because I realized that that is something that was incredibly critical for my development, for my advancement, for access to things that I did not normally have access to, whether it was contacts in a particular area or being able to obtain projects that would really help to elevate me as a professional and help to elevate my career. And knowing that, really helped me to pursue those mentoring relationships with all of the different people that I connected with after those early stages of my career.
And do you have a formula is probably not the right word, but like how you use those mentorships? Because I wonder too, were you willing to be vulnerable with your mentors? Were you willing to ask questions that maybe were a little bit uncomfortable for you? How did you use those mentors to get through some of the challenges that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think most of the mentoring relationships were formed in a very organic way, and so it developed from a whether it was a kinship or just just having really great chemistry, and seeing a just kind of like a natural evolution in the relationship to be able to help each other out, and so it was because it felt very organic. didn't feel uncomfortable sharing, what was going on in my mind, whether it was something that I was struggling with or something that I did not feel the most confident doing, disclosing what I didn't know, disclosing that there were, certain things that I found more challenging than others. It was always very, very comfortable. I think one of the guiding principles for me just as a person, and this doesn't change whether it's my personal life or my professional life, is just being very honest and authentic about whatever it is that I'm going through. I operate with that mindset all the time. And so it's become, when you ask the question, is it something that I felt it was difficult, to share those feelings? It never really has been, because I only have that one mode of operating. And so, it just felt very natural. I think it feels very unnatural to actually do the opposite, which is hiding that discomfort or hiding those feelings, because, for me, I just feel like that's just part of the way in which you create progress in your life, and the way that you grow is by disclosing what you don't know, and accepting that as, that's your starting point, and moving forward from there. So it hasn't been something that I've been uncomfortable doing.
I love that. I love what you're talking about, of really tying that willingness to be vulnerable to authenticity, right? Because I think that there is this fear that so many of us have, that if we are real in how we talk to other people and what we own in terms of, our own insecurities, or even just questions. I think I see this a lot of women just afraid to ask a question, because there's this sense of, I should already know the answer to that, or I don't want to waste somebody's time, right? And so when we think about it that way, we deprive ourselves of these very real connection points, of this opportunity to not only get the information that we're seeking, but to also build relationships with other people. And what other reason is there to have a mentor, right, than to openly say, things I don't, right? I want to learn from you. And if we're not willing to use that experience in authentic and vulnerable ways, then we're not going to get what we actually want from it.
Yeah, there's so much truth in that statement, because you're exactly right. When someone is offering their time to advise you or to help you, just kind of like explore different options, or explore different ideas, or help to give you, tips or advice in different areas, they're doing it knowing that you may need those things, right? And they're sharing it because you may not have knowledge of those things. It has nothing to do with has nothing to do with incompetence, or that you're a failure in any way. They understand that that's the dynamic of the relationship, and as a person who's being mentored, or as a mentee, understanding that, just kind of like the dynamics of that particular relationship, I think is really helpful in truly optimizing that relationship and optimizing that experience in a way that can be truly beneficial for you long term.
Yeah, and you mentioned having had managers as mentors in the past too. And so whether or not we see your manager as a mentor, I think the same principle applies, right? There's something to learn from a manager. There's a reason, hopefully, why they're in that position. And so being willing to seek their support, their insight, whatever it is that you have questions about, is going to allow you to further grow and not feel that sense of alienation that comes with feeling like, oh, I can't be honest, or I can't really ask the questions I have because I'm going to look silly, or I'm going to look incompetent, like you said.
Yeah, it's and I understand that. I mean, there are moments, those moments don't appear in that mentoring and mentee relationships. I think they probably appear, they show up if I'm sitting in an important meeting, for example, with people who who play a role in the future that I have at that company. I think that's where I may have those doubts of, ooh, do I ask this question or do I not ask this question? Do I interject with this point of view or do I not interject with this point of view? That's probably where I start to have those feelings. But in that mentoring and mentee relationship, I think there's a certain level of trust that you build with, and a certain level of rapport that you build with that particular individual, where you can be a lot more open and a lot more vulnerable about what's going on inside, and just sharing those things, and and giving it the space that it needs in order for both the mentor, your mentor, and you yourself to figure out what are the different strategies to get past that or to tackle those feelings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is really helpful because I think there is a lot of unnecessary pressure on mentoring relationships. And I like how you talked about them just growing organically. And they're simply relationships, right? I think that we think about mentors in very formal ways and that can feel intimidating, but it's really just connecting with somebody that you respect and feel you can learn from someone. And oftentimes it comes from the other person, as you said, seeing something in you, right? So it's not even necessarily something you have to seek out, but just being available to other people, being willing to be visible and connect with others so that they can see your potential and want to take an interest in your growth.
Absolutely. And as you navigate throughout your career and you are at different stages, I think sometimes there is this pressure of the formality of that mentoring and mentor mentee relationship, that sometimes people are seeking that, right, where it's oh, this person is going to be formally my mentor, and this and I'm going to be their mentee. And I look at it as a very fluid thing. I have had so many mentors throughout my career, and I continue to have mentors now as I'm exploring this recent career pivot into the world of entrepreneurship, where I happen to just have a really great conversation with someone and share with them whatever it is that I happen to be going through at that moment in time, or something that I need in that moment in order to advance in some way. And that person provides advice in that moment. And to me, I look at that one single conversation as a mentoring conversation, because that person had knowledge or skills that I did not have. And for me to just put that out there and share it with them, it gave them an opportunity to pass on some knowledge onto me. And so, I have these relationships where it sometimes is just kind of like a one-time event that happens. And I'm so incredibly grateful for those moments. And then there are other moments where I have, people in my life who are part of my I would say like semi-permanent or permanent support system, where they're there to cheer me on, to root for me, to support me in different ways, to help, hold a mirror to my face and show me that I do have the competence to succeed. I do have the skills and the intelligence to be able to make this work and to be successful, as that constant reminder of, to myself, right? When I'm unable to see it at that moment. And so having that mixture of the two, and not holding on to some kind of, I don't know, like that formal idea of what that looks like, I think it is incredibly useful from just like a mindset perspective.
Absolutely. I love how you just talked about, I wrote down this expression too as a mentor moment, right? It doesn't have to be
a long-standing, deep-rooted relationship. It can be asking one person one question in a point in time situation and perhaps never even seeing them again, right? But we can learn so much from our willingness to connect with other people.
Yeah. And when you look at it in that way, and you think about how many hours in a day that you have and how many people you connect with throughout each day, and how many people you connect with throughout each week. Think about all of the many moments where there could be an opportunity for someone to share something, as that one-time mentor, to pass on that advice or knowledge to you. And if we don't seek those things, or we don't look at it in that way, I feel like that's a real missed opportunity of so many moments like that, where you could be growing significantly, and helping yourself overcome any kind of imposter syndrome that you may be experiencing at that given moment.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the critical challenges, I think, of imposter syndrome, is that there's the self-doubt, that feeling of I don't belong, I'm not qualified, I'm going to be exposed as a fraud. But then it's compounded by the self-isolation that often comes with that, because I feel like I don't belong in the room, that I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to ask questions because I feel like I'm a fraud in my role. I'm just going to try to sit back and fly under the radar and not really go out there and connect with other people. And so we miss out, like you're saying, on all of those opportunities, as opposed to if we lean into it and say, oh, that's new to me. Can you help me understand? Not only do we then gain the benefit of that, again, information, but we're putting ourselves into a support network by default. We're automatically saying, I need you in some way, right? And people are reciprocating, and it becomes this relationship. So I think it's just such an important reminder to anybody who may be holding back, that holding back just perpetuates the pain.
Absolutely. And I like that idea of, mastery is something that takes time. It's a process, and you don't achieve mastery on day one. And I think, where that imposter syndrome starts to surface sometimes is it's almost like this real unrealistic expectation that we have of something. And I am guilty of this myself. I go through this as a not so closeted perfectionist, right? Where it's, no, I need to get it right on day one. Well, if you haven't had the same level of practice, and the same amount of time that's been spent as someone else who has, received a head start, then it's not realistic to create that comparison. There is a quote from Arlen Hamilton's book. She's the founder of Backstage Capital, which is this VC firm that invests in early stage startups, and it sticks with me all the time, which is that you should never compare your chapter 2 to someone else's chapter 10. Mm. And I think a lot of times we are doing just that, which becomes this real self-sabotaging behavior and a real self-sabotaging mindset that we're creating, because we're not giving ourselves the time to learn. We're not giving ourselves the time to grow. We're not giving ourselves the time to pace ourselves in the same way that someone else has done. They just started at a different point in time compared to us.
I love that too. And that kind of makes me think a little bit about growth mindset too. And the idea that just because I can't do it today doesn't mean that I can't do it ever. I can never do it, right? But that I just need more time. I need more practice. I need to be out there learning. And it's funny because I am a perfectionist in many ways myself. And anytime I try something new, I
always want to be perfect at it right out of the gates. And so I'll give you a funny example. Like my husband and I have gone bowling. We've taken our kids bowling a few times, and I get so angry. I'm like, I'm terrible at this. And he's like, you really arrogant enough to believe that you could be a master bowler when you only do this once or twice a year at most, right? And it made me think, and I was like, who do I think I am that I would be able to compete at? And not that I would even think about it, but like to be able to compete with people who are really skilled at that particular activity when I have not invested anything in it at all. I just show up every once in a while and expect to be great at it. And I think that's something to be thinking about in the workplace too, is of course you're not going to know as much as somebody, like you said, who's been doing this. Their career has been focused on this for the last 10 years. It doesn't mean that you can't get there if you want to. It doesn't mean that you don't today have value to offer, right? You're just at a different stage of the journey, which I love how you put.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think, it reminds me of that bowling story reminds me of when I decided to quit my corporate career and start my own business. I remember having a conversation with friends and with my boyfriend and saying, okay, well, I'm going to get this together. Everything's going to, I have what it takes to put everything together and launch in a month. That was the timeline that I gave myself, which was completely unrealistic. And they, were incredibly supportive and, didn't want to create doubt in me in any way. But I think they were definitely questioning this like unrealistic timeline that I created for myself. And I remember when that milestone showed up, I became incredibly disappointed in myself because I had not been able to achieve just that. And I, eventually got over it and, have, successfully launched and doing well now. But when I reflect back on that experience and when I look back on that, I now realize that I didn't give myself enough time. I didn't give myself enough time to explore. I didn't give myself enough time to, really give it the breathing time that it needed. I didn't give myself the time to perhaps, tinker with things, and try something out and maybe fail, and then learn from that particular failure and then, do something else. I didn't give myself enough time to talk to as many people as I probably should have. And knowing that now, if I were to advise someone who was, who is starting off from square one, where you're working on creating a business, I would say, give yourself enough time to plan out all these different little steps and these different little moments, so that you're setting yourself up for the most likely successful launch, right, that you can possibly have, because you're doing it in a way where you're giving yourself enough time.
I think that's great. And you're making me think too about how obviously hindsight is really powerful. And when we look back, we see things through a totally different lens. What if we could, in the moment, right, when we're experiencing that sense of disappointment, when we're experiencing that self-doubt, ask ourselves the question, is this realistic expectation? Is it realistic to assume that I can do this in a month? Or in the case of people who are maybe transitioning into a higher level role within their organizations, is it, when I find myself thinking that I'm a fraud, asking myself the question instead, is it realistic for me to assume that I would have mastered this new role in the first few weeks on the job, right? And just try to bring more of that bigger perspective to the moment, because we get there over time. We're able, I think, most of us, to at least look back and see where we got stuck or where our logic might have been a little bit flawed. But if we could try to accelerate that a little bit, right, and like actually catch it while it's happening, maybe we could adjust our expectations in the current state as opposed to waiting until later.
Yeah, the important thing to note about that is like one, there's a couple of things. A lot of people do it. So if you find yourself doing just that, do understand that there are many, many people out there who are doing the same exact thing. It's a very common behavior. And the second thing is that it's coming from a really good place. The intention is very positive. The intention is good. And so it's not something that you should beat yourself up over. If you find yourself doing that, see it for the positive aspects that exist within that particular action or that particular intention. And it's the actions that you take, that with using that particular intention, that good intention that you have, is going to help you reach a more successful outcome, and also help you in alleviating or minimizing any feelings of imposter syndrome throughout that process.
I love that you said that. I'm so glad you mentioned it coming from a positive place, right? And to not beat ourselves up over it, but to just be open-minded and be more patient with ourselves, right? When things don't go according to plan. How have things changed for you in this past year now that you're on your own? Has imposter syndrome shown up differently? I know, it's kind of always there to manage as we move forward through life, but does being on your own feel different from working in a more corporate setting?
Yeah, it's a world of difference. I absolutely love it. I've really embraced this new way of working. I really love being able to work on things that bring me a lot of joy, that is challenging me in different ways. And I love the flexibility that it comes with as well. I have seen myself grow significantly over the past several months. And, I'm really excited to look back in January 2021 to, see, all that I've accomplished and all that I've grown, in this year as part of this journey, right? In launching Pelora Stack and getting the name out there and growing the company. One aspect in particular that's really jumping out for me is I got this advice from a couple of different mentors in my life where they said, one of the aspects that or strategies that you can explore in order to get your name out there is building your own brand and and really becoming an authority on a specific area, right? That you're creating content around. And knowing that in order for me to do that, I would have to feel comfortable putting myself out there and doing things such as, being a guest on your podcast, and sharing stories that I normally would not be openly sharing to a wider audience, or putting myself out there on social media more often and partnering with different companies. And I've come to realize that as a brand new entrepreneur, especially when you're starting out a new business, that process of networking and branding and putting yourself out there is a lifeline, in order for your business to have the visibility that it needs, and the ability for the company to really reach out and connect with the type of customers that you're hoping to connect with, and to solve the problems that you're hoping to solve. And so, that's been a really hard journey for me, because it's truly getting myself out of my comfort level, and imposter syndrome has surfaced a number of times throughout that process. But I am so incredibly grateful that I was given that advice and I have explored it, because it becomes a lot easier each time I do it. preparing for this podcast was far easier than it was preparing for the first one. And I'm sure that, the next one that I do is going to be a little bit easier. And then eventually I'll get to a point where it's like, okay, well, piece of cake. I've done this a number of times and, I kind of get the drill and I feel a lot more comfortable, but I understand that I need to start somewhere. And that's just part of the journey that I need to go through in order to grow.
I love that too. And in what you're talking about makes a lot of sense as an entrepreneur. I can certainly relate to that in my role, but I also think it has great relevance to people who are working for others too, right? Because the branding, the networking, all of it, I think we all benefit from taking a more entrepreneurial approach to our own careers and recognizing that the opportunity to connect, to be visible, it is how we get to where we want to go, not waiting for other people to tap us on the shoulder or to notice, but to be out there more intentionally. So I think everybody can benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what motivated you to want to tell your story today? What are you hoping people will take away from today?
What I'm hoping that people can take away from this is that it's this feeling, this mindset is very normal. And there is nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be embarrassed about if you're going through this imposter syndrome, whether it's something that you're experiencing right now or you've experienced in the past or you will experience in the future as you challenge yourself to do something, something new or different. And sometimes there are people who are out there that may come across as really confident in whatever it is that they're doing, but deep down inside, they may be struggling with imposter syndrome as well. And I think that, if we have a conversation around this topic more often, I think that we'll start to discover how common it is. And that it is, it's also kind of just like a natural part of that process of growth. And that it's perfectly acceptable. It's perfectly okay. And it's something that is, in some ways, like I look forward to it because I know that there's something positive that it triggers from it, which is that change and that growth. And so now whenever I'm faced with those feelings, it's uncomfortable, but I know that it's uncomfortable because it's leading me to a really good place in the long run, right? And so I've come to a place where I've become much more accepting of it.
I love that too. And I think, it might sound crazy, but I feel sometimes like I'm too comfortable. There are times when I check in with myself and I'm like, am I a little too comfortable? How am I feeling right now? And if it's too comfortable, that's a signal to me that I need to get out there more. I need to put myself out there. I need to continue to challenge myself because you're right. It's a sign that something positive is coming, right? We're stretching ourselves. We're growing in new ways. And so I think that's such a good way to put it.
And who doesn't want that?
Exactly.
I look forward to it. So bring it on. I love it.
Thank you so much, Leang. This has been such a fun conversation. I really appreciate your willingness to share your story with us. And I'm sure there are a lot of great takeaways for people as they listen.
It's my pleasure. And thank you so much for giving me the space to be able to share.
Thanks again for listening today. If you're struggling with imposter syndrome and you'd like additional support, check out the show notes for more resources or contact me directly. I would love to help you. And if you'd like to tell your story, I would love to interview you. You will find my contact info in the show notes, so reach out anytime. Thanks again.